of the controversial things that he's going to say. So Joe Rogan's position is that men who have been men for decades should not be allowed to compete with women who have been women for decades. That just makes the most sense. And nothing should be contrary to that. That's just commonsensical. But what you're going to hear now is his position is it's okay for men to be competing in women's athletics so long as they transition from the earliest age possible.
Which is worse.
Yeah, of course it's worse. Anyway, we'll listen to what he says and then we'll talk about that, because this is becoming mainstream, and to go against this narrative means to go against the state's idea of what it means to be a good parent. And this is the point we're going to get to eventually.
All right, and they decide to transition. Now, that is a type of person that exists, right? I think over the next certainly 30 years, we're going to see, now that people are starting to understand that being trans is just a way that people are, right?
See? You see that? That's just the way that people
How
are.
is it
Again,
the way that people are when majority of people are not trans?
they're just that's what's assumed. Just like they say, even today, is to say a homosexual is not born a homosexual. That's something they choose. Is to go contrary to the assumed narrative already. We don't even talk about that anymore, because that's a battle we've lost. We know we've lost that battle.
But even to say that's who people are homosexual, is this no, because not even the majority of people, even though that's acceptable now, not even then are the majority people homosexual.
I know, but the idea that that's who they are, that's just who they are. They're born that way. That's already assumed in culture and society at large. That is the majority voice now. It's increased in the church, it's increased in society, it's increased in the culture, it's increased in politics. To go contrary to that is to commit political and social suicide in this culture, in this day and age. So it's just assumed now.
Yeah.
They're just people who are trans, and this is something that we're going to accept and support, right? You're seeing folks transition much, much earlier age,
There's
so if someone is,
transitioning at an earlier and earlier age,
because parents are starting to give in and starting to support their children, which in my mind, I'm like, that doesn't even make sense, because kids are not allowed, like I think this is in the US period, that you are not even allowed to buy cigarettes until you're 21.
right? No, in California.
In California, at least, you're not allowed to buy cigarettes until you're 21. You're not allowed to drink till you're 21. You're what is that? The frontal
lobe.
lobe part of your brain doesn't develop until you're 25 years old is when you're usually is. And in my mind, I'm like, how are you going to take the word of a 3-year-old who's telling you, Mommy, I was born a boy, but I want to be a girl, or vice versa? They have no idea what they're saying. Why would you shove pills down their throat when they see these things happening and they're confused? And instead of telling them, no, honey, you're born a boy. That's what you are. You're a boy. Instead, they comfort them. They say, okay, this is your decision. Let's go to the doctor and shove some pills down your throat and have you transition, castrate yourself as soon as possible. And it's like, what?
Yeah, of course. I mean, well, the problem is, okay, so with what ended up happening with the baby boomer generation is they were part of the greatest, or they were the outcome of the greatest generation. That was the ones that came out of World War II. And so after the recovery of the economic status of the United States after the Great Depression, things were thriving. Things were exploding economically. Those who were in abject poverty were now being able to sustain a family. So they were providing for their children, the baby boomers, things that they never could have themselves. Technology was advancing like crazy. And parenting changed in light of this new and transformed and explosion of economical wealth. Now take the baby boomer generation, and they're the ones who raised the Gen Xers and the millennials. And so they took that wealth and all that prosperity, and they raised children to the point to where they neglected discipline and responsibility, personal discipline and personal responsibility.
No, I think it was because they didn't have very much, so they wanted to provide everything their child wanted. Everything, whether it was money, emotional stability, anything. They just wanted their kid to be okay and to love them and to just give them whatever they wanted, basically. And the result of that is lack of discipline, lack of responsibility, lack of everything, basically. That is.
And well, as a millennial myself, I can talk about that, because there was a point where that idea that the world owed me something, the sense that they raised a generation of narcissists, right? Where the voice of the child was the dominant voice in the family. Parenting skills, disciplining, spanking went out the door. All those things that used to be of importance to a family structure and to developing a child, that went out, right? So now you get a whole generation of narcissists who believe that their voice was the most important. They're going to then impute that on their own children. And so at the earliest age,
and make it worse, because
they're going to make it worse, right?
Because first of all, they're going to teach them you're supposed to be narcissistic. And
they won't say it like that, but yeah.
And no spanking. Well, I mean, they're teaching them to be narcissistic.
Well, the thing was, to a certain degree, our parents told us we are wrong in certain things. So because we assumed we were always right, now we're raising children and we're thinking that our children, I'm speaking generally, of course, our children are the purest form of opinion and of belief. So anything a child says is automatically assumed to be truthful, pure, innocent, and absolute. So when a child says, when a boy says, I am a girl at the age of 4 or 5, in the mind of the narcissist millennial parent, they're thinking, I remember when I was a child and I thought I was owed everything, and my parents didn't want to ultimately give me absolute control over my life. So I'm going to allow my child to do that. And so what ends up happening is they end up giving into the foolish and depraved wickedness of their 5-year-old child.
I think I feel like they more so push it on them instead of saying, are you sure? Let's maybe try to be a boy still. But instead, I feel like they go the opposite and they almost force, like, this is a good thing. Now I'm going to buy you all girl things. I'm going to force you to be a girl now. And it's just.
Well, there's a reason. There's a reason why in the book of Proverbs, Solomon talks about the fool all the time. And the fool is the youthful kid who doesn't take the advice of a father or the advice of the mother, because children are foolish, depraved monsters. And if we don't discipline them in the fear and admonition of the Lord, and we just say, well, since you're a child and you're not influenced by outside society as much yet, your thoughts and your feelings are pure. Those are just pure feelings. And that's a fundamental denial of the nature of depravity and of sin. So to do away with it and say, you're just a pure, innocent child that comes from a place of truthfulness, and nothing is corrupting that.
I don't
that's
understand
a poor
it,
anthropological view.
We know that feelings come and go all the time. All the time. I mean, growing up, for example, me, I could have liked one boy one week. The next week, I liked another boy.
Right.
The following week, nowadays.
Which was normal in middle school and elementary school.
So at this age, to think like, hey, they feel like the boy feels like a girl, and it's just like, that's just a feeling. It can go away. A lot of the times, it can have to do with, because let's say I'm a boy and my mother is missing.
Yeah. So
I want to be a girl or whatever. It can. have something to do with so many different things that they see on TV nowadays, also
Right.
things that they hear at school. They're constantly being brainwashed with a bunch of different things, but you're not going to cave into absolutely every little thing that they feel.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's continue on with the video.
From the age of 7 years old, right? Working with those hormones, from that age, right? They're not going to have, their body situation can be very different than the one that you postulated, right? I also know from my trans friends that the effects that the hormones have on your body are really profound, really, really profound. We're not
And how sad and how dangerous it is to give that to a 7-year-old. Remember, I asked you a question, to a certain degree, what is it that's nature versus nurture when it comes to the transgender sentiments of a child? What is it that brings about that sentimentality of a child that says, I think I'm a girl if it's a boy, and I think I'm a boy if it's a girl? Where does it come from? I think partly it's nurture, and mostly or entirely nature. So from the nature of the human condition, that they're born in sin, that feeling of saying, I think I'm a girl, that's a depraved and twisted reality that's already laying in the heart of the child.
And it usually, for sometimes, it just has to do with the fact that they admire their mother. I see my son watching me all the time, my 3-year-old son, and he watches me get ready. And as soon as I'm finished, or even before I'm finished, he walks in and tells me, oh, mommy, you're so beautiful. He sees me putting my makeup on. He starts going through my makeup. Those are just natural things. He sees me doing these things, so he's curious about it. He admires me. If one day he told me, I think I'm a girl, I would tell him, no, you just admire me. It is okay to admire women.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you are one.
Right. And our boy has playfully put on dresses. And we'll tell him, dresses are for girls.
And he realizes that.
He realizes that, yeah.
He's like, oh, never mind. And he'll tell me, no, I'm not a girl.
But in today's culture, to even admit that, it's considered child abuse.
Yeah.
Because the culture says, no, you should allow that boy to wear the dress and put on the makeup and grow his hair out long and do all these things so that he can start transitioning into a girl if that's what he wants to be. And that's because culture is dictating to the parents how they should train their children. And it's going to come to a point where Christian families are going to be persecuted for raising their children to not adopt this worldview and to not to give into this worldview.
I mean, up until this point, we've already seen that they have passed a law saying that we can't even biblically counsel anybody who believes to be of a different gender. We can't biblically counsel them and tell them that is incorrect. They were born a boy, they should be a boy, or they were born a girl, they should be a girl, because you could already go to prison for it.
Yeah, and so the Christian must ask themselves to a certain degree, at what point will we as Christians civilly disobey for the sake of Christ and for the sake of the gospel? Because that's what it ultimately will come to. Is if the state is saying to you, you cannot raise your children this way, you must allow them to give in to the depravity of their hearts. At what point will the Christian say, not in my house, and you can take away my freedom, you can fine me, you can take my children, but I will not bow the knee to Caesar. And that's the kind of persecution that the early church had to face. And we have been so blessed in the United States to not have to undergo that kind of persecution at state level, that we're probably now going to start seeing the results of this. And we have to prepare ourselves.